Good morning. We have not talked numbers for quite a while. Our country positivity rate for the coronavirus is going up again. We stand at roughly 608,000 people who have already died of this virus. And we're starting to lose about 1,000 people a day again. When you talk about numbers like that, you think about Las Vegas, or you think about Nashville, or you think about Portland, Oregon, cities who have this number as their population. And you think about walking the streets of these cities, mile after mile, block after block, row house after row house, with no cars, no activity, no one in the stores, no one in the playgrounds, no one hanging out of windows. Gone. Entire cities gone because of the COVID. It makes it a little easier to understand the numbers, but still so graphically startling, agonizing. And you think, we've talked about it before, I can't help but think, every time I think of these numbers, I think of the grief that's associated with them. Scientists are saying that roughly for every person that has died, there are 7 immediately impacted people. So immediately, children, grandchildren, spouses, brothers, sisters. And then you roll into coworkers, and then you roll into people who went to school with them. And I mean, the list is exhaustive. And the collective burden of grief that we are carrying is enormous. And yet we are so tired of being under isolation, of being under stricture, right? Of having to wear masks, of having to social distance, of not just having our lives back. And the difficulty here that we face, it's a real tug of war. I want to go back to normal, and yet the danger is not over. I'm vaccinated, but what about those who are not vaccinated? What about all the children that I interact with at the store, or if I interact in other places? They're probably not vaccinated. So the risk to others. But what I'm also thinking is the enormous grief, right? Everyone processes grief differently. And as we move back into society with this wild desire we have to go back to normal, we all feel it. There's this reality that unless we grieve where we have been and what we have lost, this entire experience is for nothing and actually may work against us psychologically down the line. What do I mean? I mean, if you ignore the pain you've carried, the losses you've endured, they bite you back later on. Everyone processes grief differently. For some, they weep and it's over. For some, they weep and they don't stop weeping. For some, they never can weep. But that grief is a heavy burden they carry in their heart and on their shoulders, and they can't shake it. It's humming beneath everything that they do. Pay attention to how you are grieving. You may say, well, I haven't lost anyone, but you've lost a lot. You are a participant in the world, and therefore you've lost. But there's over 3.5 million people in this planet that have been lost, and they say that probably that number could be easily doubled because of the lack of reporting. Is there a place where you grieve? Can you find a place? Can you make a place? Can you find space in your life to grieve, to pay attention to the heaviness that you're carrying, the burden? And then we've got these wildfires going on all over on the West Coast. There's grief there too. Look at the acreage. Look at the wildlife. Look at the beauty. Lost. Grieving is an important part of loving. We can say, I'm not going to grieve. I'm not going to allow myself to feel the pain of grief. And yet, that's the balance of love, right? It's only in the loving that we risk the loss of the loved one. And not just the lives of those who've been lost in these 608,000 people, plus 1,000 dying every day, but it's also the relationships that we've lost. The guy who could laugh at your jokes, the person at work whom you greeted every time you left the office, the friends that you could share deeply with that you no longer have. You're grieving the relationship, the connections, the interaction, the sacredness of being one with people. So besides the grief and the loss, there's also an awareness to treat with deep respect those we share the planet with, we still interact with. They too are grieving, and we don't know how, and everyone shows it differently. But respecting those we share the planet with honors the place of grief in our lives. Doesn't celebrate it, honors it as a reality that we have endured, and yet we bear the scars. Be kind to yourself. Pay attention to how you are carrying the burdens of this past year. Take time. Be present. Honor where you've been and where you've come from and how you'll move forward.